I worked the night shift at a 24-hour diner just off the highway, a relic from the 60s that hasn't changed much since. Chrome counters, red leather booths, a jukebox in the corner that only plays half the songs it's supposed to. The kind of place truckers pull into when they need a strong cup of coffee to keep their eyes open, or where insomniacs sit hunched over cheap pancakes at 3 a.m., lost in thought. Most nights are quiet, predictable. The same faces, the same tired conversations. The occasional out-of-towner stumbling in, looking for something hot before they disappear back into the night. I like the routine. I like the stillness of it. Until last Tuesday, when everything changed. It was around 2:30 a.m. when he came in. Tall, lean, dressed too formally for a place like this. A crisp white button-up under a fitted black coat. His hair slicked back like he had just walked out of an old movie. His shoes barely made a sound against the tiled floor. I noticed because, somehow, he had already made it to the counter before I even realized he had entered. He smiled at me. Friendly, warm. But his eyes didn't match his mouth. There was something else there. Something calculating, like he was waiting for something. I forced a smile. Late night, huh? He chuckled. Something like that. Coffee, black. I poured it, watching him out of the corner of my eye. He sat too straight, too still. He didn't pull out his phone, didn't fidget, didn't even glance at the menu. Just sat there, hands folded neatly, watching me with a quiet intensity. You like working here? He asked, taking a sip. It was an odd question, but I get all kinds. I nodded. It's all right. Pays the bills. He hummed, like he was considering something. Then he said, ever thought about doing something bigger? The way he asked made my stomach twist. It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't small talk. It was like he was gauging my reaction. I laughed it off. Bigger? Like what? He didn't answer right away. Just took another sip, then set the cup down gently, the ceramic barely making a sound against the counter. Some people waste their potential in places like this. I didn't know what to say to that. He smiled again, that same polite, unreadable expression, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, laying it on the counter like it was nothing. For the coffee. And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the bill, at the untouched sugar packets by his cup. The diner was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator behind me. Something felt off, but I had no proof. No reason to be uneasy. I told myself I'd never see him again. I was wrong. He came back 2 nights later, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman walked in with him, her arm looped casually through his. She was younger, maybe mid-30s, dressed like she was trying too hard to look 25, ripped jeans, oversized sweater, perfectly tousled hair that looked effortless but wasn't. She was beautiful in a way that felt intentional, like every detail of her appearance had been curated. She smiled the moment she saw me, beaming like we were old friends. Oh my God, I love your hair, she said, sliding into a booth without waiting for an invitation. Seriously, I wish mine looked like that. I laughed awkwardly. Thanks. The man sat beside her, quiet. The woman did most of the talking. She asked how long I had worked here, if I liked it, what I did for fun. The questions came fast, overlapping, too familiar for someone I had just met. And then she leaned in, lowering her voice like she was about to share a secret. I run a private event club. Very exclusive. We're always looking for fresh faces. Something in my gut turned ice cold. You'd make a killing, she continued. 10 grand. Easy. Just for a weekend. I forced a smile. Sounds too good to be true. She giggled. That's what they all say at first. But it's totally safe. We've had tons of girls like you. It's fun. Private. I swallowed hard. Something wasn't right. The way she smiled, too wide, too rehearsed. The way the man beside her stayed silent, watching me with those unreadable eyes. Then she said it. You should step outside for a second. There's someone who can explain it better. My blood ran cold. I shook my head. I'm good, thanks. Her smile faltered. Just a flicker, a tiny crack in the mask. And then, as if nothing had happened, she leaned back and stretched. Suit yourself. She turned to the man. Let's go. They left without another word. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking as I wiped the counter. That should have been the end of it. But later that night, when I was locking up, I saw the car. It was parked across the street, headlights off, engine running. Just sitting there. I stared at it for a long time, my heart hammering. Then, as if on cue, it pulled away. Slow. Deliberate. Like whoever was inside wanted me to know they were watching. Like they wanted me to know this wasn't over. Story 2. I worked the night shift at a gas station off the highway, one of those places that seems forgotten by time. It's the last stop before an endless stretch of road leading to nowhere, a place where the neon sign buzzes faintly, where the fluorescent lights hum louder than the occasional customer. Most nights are dead quiet, just me, the distant sound of semis rolling down the asphalt, and the occasional weary traveler stopping in for gas, cigarettes, or coffee that's been sitting on the burner too long. I like the solitude. At least, I used to. Then last Wednesday happened. It was close to 3 a.m. when he arrived. I didn't hear his car pull in. That was the first thing that put me on edge. The lot was empty when I glanced outside a few minutes before, but suddenly, there he was, standing just outside the glass window of the cashier's booth. Too close. Too still. I jolted back instinctively, my pulse kicking up. He wasn't knocking, wasn't saying anything, just watching. His face was half hidden by the shadows cast from the overhanging lights. He wore a hooded jacket, dark and worn at the edges, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets. I forced myself to move, stepping toward the register with a practiced smile. "Hey, you need gas?" For a second, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, in a voice too smooth, too careful, he said, "No gas." I hesitated. "All right, so, what do you need?" A beat of silence. Then, "Can I come inside?" Every hair on my body stood up. I let out a nervous chuckle, shifting my weight. Yeah, that's not really how this works. You pay through the window." He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me through the thick glass. Then, slow and deliberate, he pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. He raised it, pressing it against the glass, the edges curling slightly from age. I hesitated before reaching under the window slot and carefully sliding it through. My fingers brushed against the paper. It was rough, like it had been handled too many times. I unfolded it. There was a single sentence written in small, neat handwriting. "You've seen me before." My blood ran cold. I looked up sharply. The man was gone. I scrambled to the window, pressing my palms against the glass. The lot was empty. No retreating footsteps. No engine roaring to life. Just silence. I scanned the darkness beyond the pumps, the stretch of road barely visible under the weak glow of the streetlights. There was nothing. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I exhaled shakily and looked down at the paper again. There was something written on the back. A date. Last Wednesday. I didn't sleep that morning. I couldn't. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee, staring at that note like it would explain itself if I just looked long enough. Last Wednesday. I replayed the shift in my head, trying to remember anything unusual. But nothing came to mind. Just another slow night. Just me, refilling the coffee machine, scrolling through my phone, occasionally stepping outside to stretch my legs. No strange customers. No cars lingering too long. But the more I thought about it, the more something nagged at me. I had felt something that night. A presence. A sense of being watched. I had even looked outside once or twice, scanning the empty road, shaking off the paranoia as nothing more than exhaustion. Had he been there? Had he been watching me last week, and I never noticed? The thought made my stomach twist. By the time my next shift rolled around, I had convinced myself it was just a prank. Some bored traveler messing with me. Maybe a trucker looking to freak me out for fun. I told myself I wouldn't let it get to me. And I was doing a decent job at that, until I stepped outside for a quick break around 2 a.m. and saw the car. It was parked a little down the highway, just beyond the reach of the streetlights, hidden in the dark. I knew it wasn't there earlier. The highway had been empty. And now, suddenly, a car, just sitting there with its engine off, barely visible in the shadows. A chill crawled up my spine. I stood there, unmoving, watching it, waiting for something. A door to open. Headlights to flick on. Some proof that someone was inside. Nothing. For a full minute, it just sat there. Then, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. The headlights turned on. Blinding. I flinched, instinctively raising a hand against the glare. Then the engine rumbled to life. And the car moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Straight toward me. My breath caught. I took a step back, then another. The car rolled into the lot, tires crunching over loose gravel, before jerking to a stop right in front of Pump 3. The lights shut off. The engine died, and the driver's door didn't open. I felt frozen in place. A minute passed, then another. No movement. No one got out. Just an idling car in the dead of night, perfectly still, perfectly silent. My fingers twitched toward my phone. I needed to call someone. Security. The cops. Anyone. I took a slow step back toward the booth, keeping my eyes locked on the car. Then, a knock. I whipped around. It wasn't from the car. It came from inside the booth. Behind me. My stomach plummeted. That was impossible. The door was locked. I was alone, but the sound had been right there. Soft, patient, a single, deliberate knock. I turned back toward the gas station's small security window, heart hammering, trying to glimpse inside. The booth was dark, but in the faint reflection of the glass, I saw something move. A shape, a figure, standing inside. Inside with me. I spun, lunging for the booth's door, scrambling for the key in my pocket. Then the lights cut out. Total darkness. I heard the lock click open, and from behind me, a voice. "You've seen me before." The air in the booth turned thick, suffocating. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything except the unbearable silence pressing against me from all sides. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles ached. The whisper still rang in my head. "You've seen me before." I didn't know what was worse. The fact that someone was in here with me, or the fact that I had no idea how they got inside. The power was out. The emergency lights should have kicked in, but they didn't. The darkness was absolute. And then, a slow, deliberate breath. Right behind me. I snapped. Adrenaline surged through me as I whipped around, swinging blindly. My fist connected with something solid. Something wrong. The moment I made contact, my skin went numb, like I had punched through ice water. I staggered back, gasping, my hand tingling. The darkness was shifting, moving, and then the lights flickered back on. For a second, just a single, horrifying second, I saw him, standing right there, inches away. His face. It wasn't right. Too smooth, too still, like it had been placed there. And his eyes. They weren't his. They were like glass, empty and reflective, and they were staring straight through me. I scrambled back, slamming into the counter, my breath ragged. My vision blurred from the panic, but when I blinked, he was gone. Just gone. Like he had never been there at all. The booth was empty. The door still locked. And the note was back on the counter, folded, waiting for me. With trembling hands, I picked it up, slowly unfolding the worn paper. This time, the message had changed. "You will see me again." I didn't finish my shift. I don't even remember leaving the booth. My next memory is of sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel with bloodless fingers, staring at the gas station in my rearview mirror. I should have driven off. I should have gotten the hell away. But I couldn't, because something was wrong. The gas station looked different. The lights were on. The pumps were running. Everything looked normal, like nothing had happened, like I had imagined all of it. Except, there was a car at pump 3, the same car, and the driver's door was still closed. I felt sick. My vision swam, my hand shaking as I reached for my phone. Finally, a signal. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911, pressing the phone to my ear, my breaths coming fast. But the second the line connected, the gas station went dark again. The power cut out in a single, unnatural blink, swallowing the entire lot in blackness. And then, the driver's door of the car slowly opened. I heard the creak of old metal, the shuffle of feet on pavement. I didn't wait. I threw my car into reverse and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching as I sped back onto the highway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back. I wouldn't, because I knew. I knew that if I did, he'd be watching. I called in sick the next night, and the next. By the third day, I got a text from my boss. "You okay?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't okay. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face. Too smooth, too wrong. And those words, "You will see me again." By the fourth night, I started to convince myself I had imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, sleep deprivation. Maybe none of it had happened the way I thought. Maybe I just snapped. I was almost starting to believe it, until my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. "You missed your shift." I stared at the screen, my blood turning ice cold. I hadn't told my boss I was skipping again. I hadn't told anyone. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to ignore it, to block the number. But before I could, another message came through. A photo of the gas station, taken from the cashier's booth, from inside, where I should have been. My stomach dropped. Then another text. "You've seen me before." I didn't breathe. I didn't move. And then, one final message. A photo of me, sitting in my car. Right now. I felt it before I saw it. The weight of something behind me. A presence pressing against my skin. And then, through my phone's reflection now. A face. Too smooth. Too wrong. And just before the lights cut out. A whisper in my ear. I told you. You will see me again. Story 3. I worked the night shift at a 24-hour self-storage facility just outside of town. It's not the worst job. Mostly quiet, minimal interaction, just me, a desk, and a bank of security monitors showing endless rows of metal doors. People come and go at odd hours, picking things up, dropping things off, disappearing into the night. Most of them don't talk. The ones that do usually don't say much. But last Tuesday, something changed. It started at 2:14 a.m. The buzzer went off, signaling that someone had entered the facility. I glanced at the monitor, expecting to see the usual, a truck pulling in, someone unlocking a unit, maybe a college kid shuffling through old boxes. Instead, there was nothing. The gate was open. The lights cast long, empty shadows over the pavement. But there was no car, no person, just an open gate. I frowned, clicking through the camera angles. Maybe the system had glitched. Maybe someone had come in and parked outside of view. Then, at 2:16 a.m., the motion sensor in row C went off. I checked the feed. Row C was empty. A long corridor of metal doors, all shut. The only movement came from the weak flicker of the overhead fluorescents. I waited. Nothing. I switched to the next camera. And that's when I saw it. A storage unit door. Slightly open. Just enough to see the darkness inside. Unit C17. I swallowed hard. The logbook said no one had rented that unit for months. It should have been locked. I clicked back to the front gate camera. Still empty. Who the hell had opened it? I reached for the radio to call my supervisor, but the second my fingers brushed the button, the unit door slid open a little more. My stomach clenched. No one was there. Not in the frame. Not in the shadows. But the door had moved. On its own. I exhaled, slow and steady, and told myself the wind must have caught it. Maybe someone hadn't shut it all the way. Maybe. A figure stepped into the frame. I stopped breathing. It was barely visible, half hidden in the doorway. A shape, tall and unmoving, just inside the darkened unit. It didn't shift. It didn't walk forward. It just stood there, watching the camera. I felt a shiver creep up my spine. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The storage unit door was wide open now. The space inside was empty. I leaned in, scanning the screen, my breath shallow. I didn't understand what I was looking at. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. It was just a concrete box. And yet, the figure had vanished. I reached for my phone, hand shaking, and dialed my supervisor. No signal. I glanced at the landline. The lights were out. Then, on the screen, the next unit's door slid open. C18. And then, just as slowly, C19. One by one, the metal doors began opening on their own. I pushed away from the desk so fast my chair toppled over. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, unable to move, unable to think. The row of units stretched into darkness, and the doors kept opening. One by one. And then, the power cut out. I was plunged into total silence. I didn't realize I was shaking until I felt my own pulse hammering in my ears. The monitors flickered once, twice, before dying completely. I turned slowly toward the glass window that overlooked the facility. The floodlights outside had gone dark. Everything was black, except for one thing. At the very end of row C, barely illuminated by the emergency exit light, stood a single open unit. And inside, in the shadows, something moved. The only sound was my own breathing, too loud, too uneven. The security booth felt smaller, like the walls were closing in, pressing against my ribs. Out in the lot, row C stretched into the dark, the doors of the storage units yawning open like mouths, their interiors swallowing the weak glow of the emergency exit light. I couldn't see what was inside Unit C31, but I knew something was there. Something was watching me. I reached for the flashlight under the counter with trembling fingers. My mind screamed, "Stay here, lock the door, wait for morning." But my body was already moving, my legs stiff and mechanical as I pushed the booth door open and stepped outside. The night swallowed me whole. The cold air clung to my skin, the silence thick as fog. I forced myself to breathe, forced my feet to move. One step, then another. The concrete under my boots felt wrong. Too soft, like I was stepping on something that wasn't quite solid. The row of open units loomed ahead. My flashlight beam flickered over the numbers C17, C18, C19. The empty interiors stretched on, undisturbed. Then I reached C31, and I stopped. The door was open just enough for me to see inside. The concrete floor was smeared with something dark. Not a spill, not dirt. Drag marks. My stomach twisted. I swallowed, stepped forward, and aimed my flashlight inside. The beam caught the back wall, the concrete rough and cracked. Nothing else. Just an empty unit. I let out a slow, shuddering breath, my pulse thudding in my ears. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe my mind was twisting shadows into something they weren't. Maybe. A shape moved at the back of the unit. I barely had time to react before something slammed against the walls. A metallic shriek tore through the air. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Something was inside. Something big. I turned to run, but the moment my feet hit the pavement, I felt it. The presence. The shift in the air, like the night itself, had thickened. And then, a whisper. Come back. I froze. The voice didn't come from inside the unit. It came from behind me. I turned, pulse hammering, barely able to hold onto the flashlight. And I saw him, standing at the edge of the lot. The man from the cameras. Hood up, hands in his pockets. Except now, I could see his face. And it wasn't right. His skin was too smooth, too tight, stretched over bone in a way that didn't fit. His mouth was too small, like it had been drawn on. And his eyes. There weren't any. Just smooth, pale skin where they should have been. And yet, I knew he was looking at me, watching me, waiting. I took a step back, my body screaming at me to move, to run. But then he lifted his hand and pointed to the booth, to the security monitors, to the reflection in the glass. I turned slowly, dread curling in my stomach, and I saw it. The security booth window reflected the entire lot, the rows of storage units, the open doors, and standing in every single unit was a figure. Not one, not two, dozens. Still, motionless, facing me. I spun back around. The storage units were empty. The figures were only visible in the reflection, but they were there, watching, waiting. And then, in the reflection, one of them moved. A single, jerking step forward, then another. A ripple spread through the figures, each one beginning to shift, their heads tilting at unnatural angles, their limbs twitching like broken puppets. And then, they ran, straight for me. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I ran. I sprinted toward the booth, my legs numb, my vision blurring. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I felt them. I reached the booth, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut behind me. I locked it, and then I turned. And they were all gone. The monitors flickered. The lights in the storage lot buzzed back on. The doors to every single unit were now closed, like they had never been opened, like nothing had happened, except for one thing. A note on the counter. A piece of yellowed paper, folded neatly, waiting for me. With shaking hands, I picked it up. There was a single sentence, written in neat, careful handwriting. "You've stored something here before." I dropped the paper like it had burned me. My heart pounded as I grabbed my keys, my bag, and threw the door open. I wasn't staying. I wasn't waiting. I needed to leave. I needed to never come back. I didn't even care if I lost my job. As I reached my car, I dared one last glance back at the storage lot. It was normal, silent, except for Unit C31. The door was open again, and inside, in the shadows, something moved.